Hi, good afternoon, everyone. We're here at NAA Apartmentalize 2022. And what an exciting venue, what an exciting event. Record attendance, we're so excited.
Yes.
And I'm really pleased today that I have a special guest, somebody I personally admired in the industry for years. Really great sales leader, but just a great leader in general. Your reputation precedes you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Glad to be here. I'm so excited to be here.
I am, and I'm going to pull out some of that amazing thought leadership right out of that brain right now.
I'm ready. I hope I'm ready.
You are ready. So this is Prop Talk, and it is a podcast hosted by Resman Property Management. And I'm Elizabeth Francisco. I'm really excited. The episode that we're going to be talking about is really focused on how nothing post-pandemic is the same, including how we process and think about applicants. So today, again, I'm really excited. Michael Brown, he's Executive Vice President of ResidentIQ by Western Reporting.
Inhabit IQ and Western Reporting, yeah?
Yes,
yeah.
All right, great. So excited. So we're going to talk about some things that I'm sure are on top of everyone's minds because that's a very different environment that we're in today. We ended the first quarter this year with the lowest supply of vacant units, with occupancy rates at a record 97.5%, and renewal rates are a record high of 58.3%. Historical leasing cycles, as I think we all know at this point, have been disrupted by the pandemic, and I would imagine that the record high renewal rates and unprecedented effective rent growth are continuing to disrupt the historic norms in our space. So what we want to talk about today is really thinking about how have the historic norms, how has this changed our historic leasing cycle, the patterns, the way that our residents are thinking about their housing, how is that affecting how we do our day-to-day operations? And the reality is applicant screening is a vital part of what we do. I know there's a lot of legislation that is talked about where and how that regulation should look. But before we can even dive into that, we need to think about, like, as an operator, how should I be thinking about my applicant screening? How has it changed? And that's where Michael, we've talked a little bit about this in the past. Really, I thought had some great insight. Obviously, it's your business, right? You do a great job supplying screening to property management companies all across the country. But I'm interested from your perspective, when I just shared those stats, we're record renewal rates at 58.3%. How are you seeing things change from your perspective and the base that you serve with your screening products?
Sure, a great question, and I think there are a myriad of reasons for that. Let me add to some of the stats that I think really goes into answering that question in full, and that is, in May alone, rent increases were up 10% when you look at the top metro areas across the United States.
Yes.
Now, put that in perspective, that means that rents are at, on average, $1,700. Single family rents are around $2,038. On top of that, when you look at owning a home, mortgage payments are far outpacing rent payments. So at no other time in history they used to be virtually the same.
Okay.
Now a mortgage is going to cost a consumer about $850 more than rent.
That's a substantial gap.
That's right. So it's creating additional demand.
Okay.
At the same time, because owning is more expensive than renting, there is a high increase in renewal rates, to your point. So renewal rates are increasing. When you think about a consumer going to buy or going to rent a new apartment, they're paying 20% more than the previous residents of those same units. So when you take all that into account and you are having conversations with your partners, the PMCs, our clients, it's really about understanding their business and what they're trying to achieve. And for us, ultimately, it's about how do we look for ways to drive that downstream revenue while capitalizing on our ability to manage debt on the back end.
Yes.
And there are ways that you
that's what it's all about, right? It's all about managing the risk.
That's right. So there's a number of ways that we can do that. it's a very fluid market right now. So managing the criteria in a way that's not static is extremely important. So one simple factor is, look at inflation. Inflation is far outpacing what people are making today. I mean, you only have to look at the prices of groceries and our gas prices to see that the disposable income that we have is continuing to decrease. And that has an impact on consumers' minds. It has an impact on our clients' minds. And all that weighs into ultimately is how do we provide a better client experience in the screening process, but ultimately, how do we also create a good customer experience? How do we approve more leases with no corresponding increase in bad debt? And there are ways to do that. Part of that is massaging the rent to income, right? Not using that as a static ratio at 3 to 1, right? We're having
I think it's funny you bring that up, because when we think about, I've been in the industry for 30 years, came up as a leasing agent myself, and that, you need to make 3 times the rent, right? That was our standard.
That's right.
Well, when you look at salary, so I was in a webinar with ALN earlier this year. We were looking at the average salary increase across the nation, and it was only up like 4.3% back in January, February.
That's right, yeah.
But the average increase on rent, compared to salary, was like a 15% gap.
It's some of the data I'm looking at is around 20%.
Yes, well, and this is back in January and February.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because I've had people who were asking, in the past, before the pandemic, I heard management companies, some of them kind of were, flirting around with this idea about screening on renewals.
Sure. Yeah.
And I just legitimately had somebody ask me that last week about, with this rent to income ratio challenge that we're facing, and you think about these renewals that are coming in at, we say 20% nationally, but I've heard markets are 30-40% increase to rent on renewals.
Well, yeah, because it's the new rents are far increasing over renewal rates.
Yes.
So for those that were looking to buy homes or perhaps moving to another unit across town, they can't afford those rent increases, so they're renewing. Yep. And renewal rates are at an all-time high, for sure. And that's great for our clients.
Yes. Well, and it's interesting because there are companies out there who, and I'm sure you have some, that do rescreen on renewals. And I just thought about, could you imagine, which is why this won't happen, right now, because the salaries haven't kept up. And so it makes me wonder what, because we're not going to rescreen renewals in general. And right now, I wouldn't advise that myself if I was an operator, because I know the outcome. What am I going to do? Then cause my own vacancy because of this? Right. And who's going to fill it that can afford the new rent? So a resident that's doing what they have to pay is worth a lot of, it's less risk, right? That's the way I look at it.
It all goes back to capacity and willingness to pay as well, right?
Yes.
When you look at, again, the money that a consumer has to spend on the things they need a roof over their head, so they're going to pay for the rent. They may not have the best credit. They may be living paycheck to paycheck, but they're managing their responsibilities in a very responsible way. I'd say on top of that, when you think about your rents it's very fluid. Things are always changing. Screening is meant to be part of that. So on renewals, I talk to clients on a weekly basis about, all right, if you're going to screen on renewal, what does that look like? And typically that would be, number one, are they paying the rent? If they're already paying the rent, it's very unlikely, to your point, that they're going to rescreen. There's really not a need to. Where when they have a sector of the rental population that is behind in their payments, or there's been events that happen, they're having conversations with them, that may be an opportunity to do some type of revalidation.
As long as it's consistent.
That's right.
Overall, so.
It's a very consistent process, and it needs to be built into their lease.
Yes, that would have to be done up front. So we talked a little bit, I don't know, it seems like 2 weeks ago, and I'm glad you're feeling better, by the way.
Thank you.
We're talking about this, again, back to income rent challenge.
Sure.
And I wonder about what's happening if this is the fear from a renewal standpoint.
Sure.
What about net new leases? And what is the approval, or I should say denial, right? The approved with conditions. Like, are you seeing, because my guess is we would see some changes in that data, but I wondered if you're seeing that in your company.
It depends on whether it's a luxury asset or when you get into your B and C class assets. Luxury, not as much. We are seeing that more often in the B and C class assets. And again, that's where they're making fluctuations in, number one, what is the conditional range? So, we have a statistical scoring model, so they're able to adjust their risk incrementally so that they're still able to approve with a condition, say a half month's deposit rent, but still get that person approved and moved in, right? Versus someone has a much higher risk, they may be on the bottom end of that require an additional 1 month deposit. We are seeing an expansion in conditionally approved applicants than we were this time last year.
So I would be curious about, and I don't know if you have any data, with the approved conditions in the market, and just in general what we're talking about, we know that inflation's crazy.
Sure.
All your basic necessities, food, shelter, housing, everything's up, gas. I'd be curious about the ability of approved with conditions to come up with those extra deposits and to do you see them going all the way through the lease?
There is some compression there. I mean, we have, I don't have specific stats on it, but we do see a higher number of conditional applicants that abandon the process because they can't afford whatever that condition is. So what we're doing with that, again, we have, it's good practice for any good screening provider to hold account reviews. We are holding those more often now because we're just seeing a lot of different movement, and people are asking lots of great questions about how they more effectively manage their renter quality.
Oh, you didn't mean I was asking great questions?
Yes, you are. You always ask great questions, right? But
screening is fun. Screening is a great necessity. I love living in properties that have screening.
That's I think is good practice. So we need to be setting down, or our clients need to be setting down with their screening providers and asking the questions, and they should be working with them. They should have the data to provide some insights on what they can do in terms of managing that risk effectively.
Well, thank you for your insight there.
Sure.
One of the, just before we wrap up that part of our discussion, I just wondered about, because of the income to rent ratio challenges that we're seeing,
Sure.
Are you seeing management companies kind of come back and reevaluate the scoring models they're using? In other words, do you see an environment where instead of this rule of 3 times rent, right, which we've used ever since I got in the industry,
Sure,
it seems like, are they changing that because of the challenges with
Sure.
movement and the approvals, the approval condition? Is 2 times enough now?
Great question. And again, it depends on the asset type. I'm not seeing that as much in the luxury assets. I do see that more in the B and C. And it really comes down to a matter of if they're finding more and more of their renter population are coming into less than the 3 to 1. That's a metric we can quickly identify. I think what's important to point out is, in a good screening environment, rent to income should not be looked at as an absolute limiter, a silver bullet. You should be looking at the entire holistic picture of that consumer and then making a decision based on that. Rent to income is an important factor. It provides understanding of capacity to pay. But what about a willingness to pay? So looking at the financial behavior, how are they performing on their installment accounts? Are they paying the rent? Those are really good indicators of whether or not, yes, we are willing to drop that down to 2.5 or 2, being consistent with that process, obviously.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. I hope that we continue to see people trying to rethink those models. Being a struggling young person once in my life for an extended period of time, I would agree. I mean, when that rent's prioritized, your traditional credit score of someone who's maybe struggled with a credit card or a medical bill, which I know normally we factor that out.
Sure.
But when someone has consistently prioritized their housing, it should matter. So
That's right.
I'm glad to hear that.
And that's a big difference between just credit quality and what I like to refer to as renter credit quality. It's taking more factors into consideration than just credit.
Okay.
Again, rental worthiness. How are they paid on certain installment accounts that would have indicators of how likely they are to pay the rent?
Okay.
Those are all really good things that you can measure and glean out of good screening.
Yeah. And it makes us a good partner to renters in America,
That's right.
which I think throughout the pandemic, we really, as an industry, professionally managed units stepped up. And we need to continue to step up because there is this other side of the coin now as we go into 2023, which is just around the corner.
That's right.
And residents our residents. I always say ours because once an operator, always an operator. But there is a financial strain on these households, and I'm sure that's got to be really causing a lot of anxiety and stress in our renter base. So now's not the time for us to stop being part of the solution.
No, I'd say on the contrary, we need to continue to hone in on it. There's talk of we obviously recession and inflation. All of that has an impact on our clients, our consumers, the renters, and again, we should be mindful of that and make adjustments where we can.
Yeah, agreed. Well, and as much as we're renter advocates, right, doing the right thing, not all renters come in with good intentions.
That's exactly how true.
Yeah. And that's my segue, so artfully done, into applicant fraud. Because, it's something that I've dealt with it in my past,
Sure. Yeah.
but I haven't had an asset under management since 2015.
I knew you back then.
I know you did. That's why we've been around. And I just wondered about, as you were talking, you said that you're seeing an increase in that.
Yeah.
And I dealt with it as a rare occasion. So talk to us about that. Like, what is really happening out there?
Well, ever since the pandemic, we've seen consistently across the United States a rise in application fraud, particularly coming by way of synthetic fraud. Synthetic fraud is fraudulent individuals that are parsing together pieces of PII data from different consumers to make up a different consumer person, right? And this person is very hard to trace. It's very hard to identify if you're not using the right technology. So there are some really good products out there. They're good services. I'd say for me, again, if you look at operators, look at enterprise level operators, they are experiencing 100% fraud across their portfolio. And there's plenty of stats out there that you can go and read about that. In the mid-market, 10, 15,000 units, they're experiencing that around 70, 80% of the time. And that also is continuing to increase. So it's out there, it's rampant. So operators they're looking for solutions to help them curb application fraud, is the bottom line. What I would say is, and again, number of products out there, is that operators should be looking for solutions that are super lightweight, easy to implement.
What do you mean by lightweight?
The workflow is super easy for the consumer as well as the end user, right? That it's fast, that it fits into their current workflow.
Okay.
I'd say the most important thing is making sure that it's passive. And what I mean by passive is there's technology out there that will do an ID verification to validate all the PI information, name, address, social, date of birth, even phone number, so that you can make sure that the person applying and what they're providing on the application is who they say that they are. And you can do that in a very frictionless, passive way, meaning the consumer doesn't even know it's happening. So by doing that, it becomes a very consumer-centric solution as part of the application process. And our clients love it because it is seamless, it's fast, and it moves right into their screening leasing workflow and directly into the system of record.
Well, and we always know too, for those that do get in, people that don't have this process or are not taking advantage of that type of technology, and they get into the assets, they never leave the asset the way they found it.
No,
Those units are a mess, and
they're
they'll stay in there for as long as they possibly can. They'll destroy the apartment, and that's an expense. And we hear a lot talking in media about how rents are going through the roof, and the big bad landlord. But there's a reality to running these businesses that nobody talks about. And I think the fraud part is something that I don't hear about it ever in the media circles, but I've heard from you, I've heard from others that it's a growing problem. Case in point, it's why we have probably 4 or 5 of them higher on the trade show floor at NAA.
That's right.
So it's a necessary, I would say necessary evil, but it's definitely a necessary product right now. Unfortunately.
It is, and we're very thankful to have one that we're very excited about. But there are other solutions out there. I'd say just do your vetting, choose wisely. And again, make sure that it fits into the workflow.
Good advice.
Yeah.
So I think the last thing I wanted to tackle for us to kind of wrap up is thinking about 2023.
Sure.
And the realities of being in property management we have a budget. We plan for our applicant screenings and the revenue that comes along with that. And I would imagine that because of the renewal rates and what we're seeing, people are potentially even off budget from where they need to be from a revenue stream.
Yes.
Because they count on that revenue. And so I think about 2023 and, how do you think the current market conditions could impact leasing activity into next year? I wonder if you had any thoughts on it.
Yeah. Again, the market. You've been around long enough to know it's.
I have
we
a
both
theory.
have. Yeah. It's all very, very fluid. Forecasting can be a challenge. I'd say there's a few resources out there that I rely on. A lot of clients that I speak to rely on. And one, NAA is a great resource.
Yes.
NMHC is a great resource. There's tons of data out there to get. But beyond that, I'd say, taking a very macro level, is what's going on in one's market.
Yes.
Was there a new employer coming in? Was there an employer that left? Simple, easy things that you can do from that perspective, I think, help. And we talk to clients, that's what they're doing. They're shopping their competitors to glean data. I'd say to bolster that even further and to drive additional efficiencies, knowing that all these factors are at play, is clients are looking for choice in their product and service providers. That is something that I'm seeing. It's been happening this year. We'll see that. I think that trend will continue in 2023 and beyond, where more operators are looking for agnostic APIs so that they can choose solutions that fit their business needs, that match what they need for their business. So we're very attuned to that. We know that our clients are, and I think that goes along with managing the challenges that they have in the market, right? Because again, we know it's fluid. That's why we love it. That's why we do it every day, because there are challenges, but there are solutions to those challenges. I look around here, look at all the new property tech that's out here, which is super exciting to see. So there's a lot to learn. There's a lot to see.
Well, I think so. One of the things, so I don't have a crystal ball. None of us do. But as you said so nicely, I have been around for a hot minute, maybe 3 decades of hot minutes at this point. And so I think maybe some good news is that for the industry, I think there's going to be another weird wave that's going to continue to disrupt our historical leasing cycles and the metrics that we rely on for our budgeting purposes. Because what I and this anecdotal only here, but being a property manager and being the talkative one, so I knew my residents. All I keep picturing is, and I know people that, including one of my own children, that settled. They wanted to move, but it's kind of like selling your house right now in Dallas. Where are you going to move to? And when they started looking out in the market, the rent growth had gone too high for them, so they decided to stay in their current apartment unit. This is the same unit that they just spent 2 years in a pandemic in.
Wow. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
You see where I'm going with this?
Absolutely.
And now that they're in the apartment for yet another year, we love to have longevity in our apartments, don't get me wrong. But for the renters out there that were ready for a change because they spent an exorbitant amount of time in their units during the pandemic, for 2 years, they're going to be just itching to go as soon as they can. So I'm anxious to see.
It's an interesting
point. And I think there's going to be the human nature. I don't have a metric to prove this, but I think that just human nature and knowing people, they're going to move when they can. And then I think you're going to have a problem. I hope you staff up well. Because I think there's going to be a lot of screening going on, and the courts better get ready for their part. Yeah. But it's coming.
I believe you're right. I think what is interesting and exciting to see is that leasing activity is strong, right? It's just the type of leasing activity that we're seeing. When we look at same-source sales, meaning when you look at our client base and how they screened last year versus how they're screening this year, it's up, but it's not up as much as we thought it would be because of lease renewals, because people are staying longer, and that's great for our clients.
So, and I will say this: one of the things that surprised me in our database, and that's where I came up and really thought about my theory on this, is that we are seeing from January to May, the number of screens was down. What is it, normally around 6 to 7% of the total units, was down around 3 to 4%. And that was only through May, though. I kind agree with you. I think June, I'll be surprised to see what leasing activity ends up being for June. But going in July, August, but even in September or October, because that cycle again has changed so much that I don't know if we know yet. Will we get back to the traditional leasing cycles? I think that remains to be seen. But I'm hopeful for 2023. I think we'll have some more of the activity we're all used to. So for all my supplier partners out there that help turn units, you better be ready also.
We also need more demand, right?
Well, I'm in a sunshine state, so I have a feeling we have a lot of demand.
Yeah. Well, I'd say supply, though. The supply, I mean, we think about affordable units.
Yes.
We're desperately in need of affordable units in the market.
That's a different podcast, but you're welcome to participate.
This has been great.
Well, thank you. You've been fantastic. And it's kind of a deep thoughts. For those of you that are old enough to remember, that's a Saturday Night Live reference. You remember? Deep Thoughts with John Handy?
Yeah.
Deep Thoughts. But you made it a fun conversation. It's a serious conversation because we have a fiduciary responsibility to those investors. We have a fiduciary responsibility to the other residents. I agree. At the properties. I've always thought that. So I just want to say thanks, guys, for joining us. If you're not here at NAA this year, you are missing out. So we better see you next year when it's in Atlanta. But stay tuned, and we look forward to talking to you next time.